So, if you break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, right?
Right, yeah.
And the doctor just points at the screen and says, there it is. It's, binary, broken or not broken. It's a clean, visible, neat categorization. But what happens when you try to put a believer's soul into an x-ray machine? Welcome to Reformed thinking. You step into the world of theology and the daily life of a Christian, and suddenly that physical scan seems totally inadequate.
Yeah, completely.
We want a simple, glowing indicator to show us who is righteous and who is not. I mean, we want to be able to spot it from across the room.
It would make things easier.
Right. But the reality of faith playing out in real time involves hidden internal motives, private financial decisions, and, well, quiet reactions to really devastating news.
Yeah.
So today we are taking a deep dive into the source material to look at the X-ray of a believer's soul. We are looking at Charles Spurgeon's exposition of Psalm 112 from his massive work, The Treasury of David.
Such a great resource.
Oh, absolutely. And we have notes from some of the greatest minds in Christian history, John Calvin, Thomas Manton, Albert Barnes, and many others. We really want to see what a life altered by grace actually looks like on a Tuesday afternoon when things go terribly wrong for you.
Yeah, that X-ray analogy is a great starting point. When we look at Psalm 112, we have to start by setting the proper context, because reading this text in isolation can lead to a massive misunderstanding of what is actually being prescribed here.
Right. Context is everything.
It really is. So
Yeah.
Psalm 112 is the companion to Psalm 111. In fact, Spurgeon provides a brilliant illustration right at the beginning of his exposition. He suggests that Psalm 111 is the sun and Psalm 112 is the moon.
Ooh, I like
Yeah,
it.
that's great. Psalm 111 is entirely about declaring the glory, the majestic works, and the character of God himself. It's the blinding, original light of divine perfection. Psalm 112, on the other hand, is the moon, because it speaks of the reflection of that divine brightness in the lives of believers. The moon has no light of its own, right?
Right. It only shines because it's positioned to reflect the sun.
Spot on. And this brings us to a theological framing for our entire discussion today, one that aligns completely with the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Which is crucial for us here.
Absolutely. This text does not extol human merit. I mean, we are not reading a self-help manual on how to become a morally superior person through sheer willpower or, like, strict habit tracking.
Right. It's not a 10-step program.
No, not at all. The psalmist is praising God for the manifestation of his glory seen in his people. Any goodness, any charity, any stability you see in the believer described in this psalm is a result of God's grace.
Yeah.
We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works.
Hmm.
The praise goes to the creator, not the reflection.
Okay, let's unpack this because that is a massive distinction. We have a strict rule on this show, by the way, for you listening. No interrupting each other's core arguments. We want to allow for complete, thoughtful analysis, but I'm tracking right with you here.
I appreciate that.
If we approach this psalm thinking it's a checklist for us to earn God's favor, we have missed the point entirely. We are looking at the fruit of salvation, not the root of it.
Yes.
The root is God's grace. The fruit is the behavior described here. So looking at the very first verse, it says, "Praise ye the Lord. Blessed is the man that feareth the Lord, that delighteth greatly in his commandments." Right away, we have this command to praise Jehovah and then the definition of the blessed man. He is defined by two actions, fearing the Lord and delighting greatly in his commandments.
Two very distinct things.
Yeah, and honestly, I have to push back on this concept or at least voice a question that I think many of you listening might be asking right now.
Sure, go for it.
Wait, if someone is afraid, how can they take pleasure in the rules? Fear and delight seem like oil and water, they just don't mix.
It's a fair question.
Right, I mean, if I am terrified of a tyrant, I do not delight in his laws. I obey them to survive, but I resent them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. But I think we resolve this by comparing it to a child's healthy respect for a loving parent. A child who knows they are loved still has a reverence, a fear of crossing a boundary because they respect the parent's authority.
That's a great way to frame it.
Contrast that with a citizen's dread of a dictator. The dictator rules by terror, and the citizen obeys out of a desire for self-preservation. The child obeys out of desire to honor the relationship. How do the commentators in our source material break down the specific tension between fear and delight?
So Wolfgang Musculus and Thomas Wilson are particularly helpful here in our source material. They distinguish between two types of fear, slavish fear and filial fear.
Okay.
Slavish fear is what you just described with the dictator. It's a dread of punishment. Musculus points out that there is a kind of fear that produces misery and wretchedness, not blessedness.
Right, the fear of the whip.
Yes, exactly. The fear of a slave who only works because the whip is raised. But filial fear, the fear of a son or daughter, is godly reverence that has been sweetened into love.
Sweetened into love. I love that phrase.
Yeah, Wilson defines it as the emotion that restrains us from evil and incites us to well-doing, noting that God alone is the author of this specific type of fear.
Wow.
And this connects directly to the Reformed doctrine of total depravity and irresistible grace.
How so?
Well, total depravity teaches that in our fallen state, our natural disposition toward God's law is hostility. We might obey outwardly out of slavish fear to avoid consequences, but we do not delight in it. Our hearts are naturally opposed to his authority.
We naturally want to be our own boss.
Right. Therefore, for a human being to transition from either ignoring God or dreading him to possessing a filial fear that actually delights in his commandments, well, that requires a supernatural intervention.
Yeah.
God's irresistible grace must change the heart of stone into a heart of flesh. The mechanism of this change is pretty staggering. It's not a negotiation.
My God isn't barter with us.
No, he does not just persuade the mind. He fundamentally alters the affections. John Calvin zeroes in on the Hebrew word used for delight, which is chaffetz.
Chaffetz.
He notes that it means a willing and prompt endeavor. It is not constrained obedience. And this brings us to what we call the third use of the law in Reformed theology.
Right, because the law has multiple uses.
Correct. The law is not just a mirror to show us our sin, nor just a bridle to restrain societal evil. For the redeemed believer, it is a guide for Christian living.
Yeah, a roadmap.
Thomas Manton makes an observation in the sources, saying that we have known hypocrites who rejoice in doctrines, but never in the commandments.
Oh, wow. That cuts deep.
It does. A slavish religiousness where someone would rather not do the work if they could get away with it lacks sincere love. True believers cheerfully practice the law because love sweetens the command.
Hypocrites rejoicing in doctrine, but ignoring the commandments. I mean, that hits close to home for anyone who spends time in theological circles.
Very true.
It is so much easier to win a debate about theology online than it is to cheerfully practice patience with your family on a frustrating Tuesday morning.
Isn't that the truth?
Manton is showing us that mental assent to a doctrine is cheap. The actual X-ray of the soul is what you do when the commandment requires sacrifice.
Yes.
And this inward delight that Calvin and Manton were talking about, it logically results in outward visible fruit. It does not stay trapped in the mind.
It spills over.
Right. It spills over into the physical world, which brings us to the generational effects of faith found in verses 2 and 3. The text says, "His seed shall be mighty upon earth. The generation of the upright shall be blessed. Wealth and riches shall be in his house, and his righteousness endureth forever."
Okay, yeah.
We have to address the obvious tension here. We read promises about the upright having mighty children and houses full of wealth and riches.
Right.
Yet many devout, faithful believers are incredibly poor. They struggle to pay the rent. Their children might face immense hardships. I mean, some of the most faithful Christians in history were martyred and left their families absolutely destitute.
That's a historical fact.
So how do we read this without falling into a prosperity gospel trap that says, if you are good, you will get rich?
Applying a Reformed hermeneutic here is essential to avoid that exact prosperity gospel trap. When we look at the notes from Albert Barnes and David Dixon, they clarify that these are general statements, not universal guarantees for every single individual.
General statements, okay.
Yes. They are describing the general trajectory of a life lived with integrity. Honesty, diligence, and upright dealing usually yield better societal and financial results than cunning and deceit.
That makes sense.
If you are trustworthy, people want to do business with you. If you are diligent, you tend to build stability. Thomas Scott provides a vivid biblical comparison in his commentary to illustrate this dynamic.
What's the comparison?
He compares Lot to Abraham.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Lot looked at the fertile, wealthy plains of Sodom and chose them for quick financial gain. He was hoping to enrich his family through proximity to a booming, albeit wicked, economy.
Right, he chased the bag, as they say.
He did. And the result was disaster. He lost everything and his family was shattered. Abraham, on the other hand, chose piety and obedience. He did not chase the quick wealth, yet he left a far better, more lasting legacy for his descendants.
Wow.
But we must also spiritualize this wealth, as Charles Spurgeon does so beautifully in the text. Spurgeon asks, what wealth can equal that of the love of God? What riches can rival a contented heart?
Nothing, really.
Right. An honest man might be a rising man in society, But the true riches of the believer are internal and spiritual. A thatched roof and a cold stone floor mean nothing if the heart is cheered with the favor of heaven.
That's a beautiful image.
What's fascinating here is the phrase at the end of verse 3, "His righteousness endureth forever." John Fry and J.J.S. Perone weigh in on this. Human goodness fades. Our best moral efforts are flawed.
Very flawed.
So for righteousness to endure forever, it cannot be our own manufactured morality. This must be a reference to the everlasting imputed righteousness of the mediator, Jesus Christ.
That concept of imputed righteousness changes everything. I mean, if my eternal standing depended on my own enduring goodness, I would be in constant panic.
Oh, absolutely.
It would be like trying to maintain a perfect credit score in a system where one late payment means permanent bankruptcy.
That's a terrifying thought.
But the doctrine of justification says that Christ's perfect righteousness is credited to the believer by faith alone. It is a legal, forensic declaration.
Yes.
God looks at the believer and sees the perfect record of Christ. So, while earthly wealth may come and go, the believer standing before God, their imputed righteousness, is secure for all eternity.
Completely secure.
And having established that the believer has this secure standing before God, we really have to look at what happens when this secure believer faces inevitable worldly trials. Because the X-ray of the Christian life is not always a picture of perfect health and sunny skies.
No, it rarely is.
Right. Verse 4 says, "Unto the upright there ariseth light in the darkness. He is gracious and full of compassion and righteous." Notice that it explicitly says, in the darkness. Even the upright experience dark days.
That's unavoidable.
This text shatters the illusion that faith is a shield against all earthly suffering. I love the analogy used by Alexander Raleigh in the source notes. He compares the spiritual dawn to the physical sunrise.
It's a great visual.
Yeah, think about a city sleeping. When the sun rises, the vast majority of people do not even notice. The light comes, the day begins, and they sleep right through it.
Right.
But think about the person who has been awake all night in a sick room, watching a loved one suffer, listening to them breathe, waiting for the morning. Or think about a tempest-tossed sailor who has been fighting huge waves in pitch blackness, not knowing where the jagged rocks of the shore are.
Desperately waiting for the light.
Exactly. To those people, the sunrise is intensely anticipated. It is a victory. The spiritual light that God brings to the upright is like that. It is profoundly felt by those who are in the midst of the darkness.
George Horne provides a magnificent outline of this experience in his commentary. He identifies a threefold darkness that every believer is subject to while on this earth.
Threefold darkness.
Yeah, the darkness of error, the darkness of sorrow, and the darkness of death. These are unavoidable human experiences. You cannot pray your way out of encountering them.
Yeah, no one gets a pass.
Right. But Horne notes, God meets this threefold darkness with a threefold light.
Okay.
To dispel the darkness of error, God provides the light of truth. To dispel the darkness of sorrow, he provides the light of comfort. And to dispel the darkness of death, he provides the light of life.
Wow.
God comforts the believer just as surely as the morning follows the night. But there is also a causal connection regarding the character of the believer here, which Thomas Chalmers points out.
What's the connection?
Chalmers argues that doing what is right logically leads to seeing what is true. Integrity of purpose actually creates clearness of perception.
Oh, that's really interesting.
If you have an honest desire to know the truth, and you obey the truth you already know, it brings a light into your circumstances that nothing else can. A person who is constantly living in deceit is shrouded in a mental fog of their own making. They cannot see clearly because they're always managing their lies.
Try and remember who they told what to.
Exactly. The upright man does not have to manage lies so his vision is clear. Furthermore, we must look at the adjectives at the end of verse 4. Gracious, full of compassion, and righteous.
Okay.
As we established in our introduction, Psalm 111 describes God. In verse 4 of Psalm 111, God is described with these exact same words. Gracious, full of compassion, and righteous.
Oh, I see the parallel.
Now, in Psalm 112, the believer is described with these words. When God makes a man upright, he makes him like himself. We are imitating the Creator.
Yeah.
We are, as Spurgeon says, humble copies of the great original. Our grace, our compassion, and our righteousness are derived directly from our union with Christ and the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit.
We are humble copies of the great original. That is such a high calling. And that compassion we just mentioned, it's not just an inward feeling.
Oh, it's
not just sitting in a room feeling bad for people who are hurting. True compassion requires a practical outlet. It moves into the physical realm. So if a believer is filled with this compassion and grace, how does it manifest in their daily routine?
This should show up somewhere.
Right, which steers our discussion directly toward the economics of the believer, which brings us to verse 5. A good man showeth favor and lendeth. He will guide his affairs with discretion. Here's where it gets really interesting for me.
I agree.
We often divorce the spiritual from the practical. We think of piety as long prayers, reading massive theological volumes, and quiet contemplation in a dimly lit room.
The monastery mindset.
Yes, exactly. But this text zeroes in on the practical nature of piety. It does not say the good man only prays. It says he manages his accounts well. True religion is sanctified common sense. The X-ray of the believer's soul shows us their financial ledger. Now, I will admit, reading this, I have a bit of pushback.
Okay, let's hear it.
It says he lends, but isn't lending inherently risky? If we are called to be radically generous, shouldn't a believer just give everything away? Why is there this focus on managing affairs and lending, rather than just taking a vow of poverty and giving every single penny to the poor to prove how detached we are from the world?
You are absolutely right to focus on that tension. And the commentators place massive weight on the concept of discretion to answer that question.
Discretion.
Yeah, Thomas Binney addresses this by stating that money stewardship demands reflection, conscience, and tact. The believer's mind is their master's, just as much as their hands are. Everything must be weighed in the balance.
Okay.
John Spencer shares a fascinating story about St. Anthony to illustrate this. St. Anthony asks various fathers what virtue most directly leads to perfection.
And what do they say?
Well, some said fasting, some said prayer, some said poverty and obedience. But St. Anthony concluded that while all those graces are excellent, discretion is the chief of them all.
Wow, really? Over prayer and fasting?
Yes. Discretion is the moderator of all affections. As Spencer notes, zeal without knowledge is blind. Alms must be given with discretion. If you fast without discretion, you destroy your physical health.
That's true.
If you give without discretion, you might actually cause harm to yourself and your dependents. Regarding your pushback on lending versus just giving everything away, Michael Cox and Albert Barnes provide excellent clarity.
What do they say?
Providence makes the believer able to lend, and grace makes him willing to lend. But discretion prevents him from risking his all foolishly. If a good man gives everything away recklessly, he removes his future capacity to be a blessing to others.
He dries up his own well.
Precisely. Spurgeon had a sharp warning here. He says carelessness in business can become almost as bad as actual knavery.
That is a strong word.
It is. If a Christian is so spiritual that they neglect their secular business, go into terrible debt, and cannot pay their employees or their bills, they bring ruin on themselves and disgrace to the gospel.
The world is watching.
They are. True religion requires us to drive our affairs and not allow them to drive us. Sanctified common sense means our accounts are straight, our plans are wisely laid, and we are sensible. We don't use faith as an excuse for financial incompetence.
I love that phrase, carelessness in business can become almost as bad as actual knavery. It totally reframes how we view our daily responsibilities.
It really does.
Doing your spreadsheet accurately is a spiritual act. Paying your vendors on time is a theological statement. So if a believer is meticulously managing their finances and acting with this high level of discretion, what happens when something totally outside their control wipes it all out anyway?
Because that happens all the time.
Right. What happens when a market crash hits or a medical diagnosis drains the savings account? Does that discretion just turn into panic? Verses 6 through 8 show us an unshakable posture against bad news.
Let's look at the text.
The text reads, "Surely he shall not be moved forever. The righteous shall be in everlasting remembrance. He shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. His heart is established. He shall not be afraid until he see his desire upon his enemies." Let's start with verse 7. He shall not be afraid of evil tidings.
Such a relevant verse for today.
We live in a 24-hour news cycle where evil tidings are delivered to our phones constantly. Economic collapse, war, disease, political upheaval. I want to compare the believer in this text to a well-anchored ship.
Oh, yeah.
When the weather forecast predicts a Category 5 hurricane, which is, the ultimate evil tiding for a sailor, the ship is not destroyed by panic. The waves have not even hit yet, but the sailor knows the anchor is dropped and it is caught on solid rock beneath the surface.
The preparation was done in the calm.
Yes. The fear of the storm is mitigated entirely by the strength of the anchor. The anchor holds. And then we have this phrase about being an everlasting remembrance in verse 6. How do the commentators view this kind of legacy compared to the ways the world tries to build a lasting memory?
The contrast regarding everlasting remembrance is beautifully articulated by John Donne in our source material. He contrasts the durability of the believer's legacy with worldly monuments, specifically the Egyptian pyramids.
Oh, the pyramid.
Yeah, those stately, durable pyramids were built to immortalize the pharaohs at immense human cost. But as Dunn points out, they have not even successfully transmitted the names of those buried in them to the general public.
That's ironic.
It is. The embalming process merely resulted in their bodies being tossed about and exposed as spectacles of meanness or horror to the curious centuries later. They wanted eternal glory and became museum exhibits.
Wow, that is a striking point.
But Donne notes, the piety of Abraham, Jacob, David, and Samuel outlasts the stars. Their legacy is celebrated to this very day, and when the pyramids sink and the seas cease to roll, the righteous will still be in everlasting remembrance because God himself takes charge of their memorials.
That's a beautiful thought. God takes charge of the memorial.
Now, regarding the anchor you mentioned, the fixed heart in verse 7, this links directly to the Reformed doctrine of the perseverance of the saints. Robert Leighton and Thomas Manton expound on this brilliantly.
Okay, what do they note?
Manton says that when a man's comfort ebbs and flows with the creature, meaning earthly things like his bank account, his health, his social standing, he will panic when evil tidings come.
Because his foundation is shaking.
Exactly. If your confidence is in your wealth and you hear of a market crash, your heart fails because your God is failing. But when your confidence is laid up in God's unchangeable sovereignty, you maintain equanimity.
You stay level-headed.
Yes. Leighton echoes this, stating that God is unchangeable, and therefore faith is invincible because it fastens the heart on the rock of eternity. The believer can face the ruin of their estate and say, my inheritance is safe.
Yeah.
They can face the death of a dear friend and say, my father lives. This is not a stoic denial of pain. Leighton notes that the believer still has compassion and mourns the distresses of the world, but amidst all hard news, there is a calm in the believer's mind, because the throne of God is fixed. The news on earth does not change the reality of heaven.
That distinction between Stoicism and Christian peace is vital. It is not that the believer does not feel the pain of the evil tidings. It is that the pain does not unseat their core confidence.
Exactly.
They still weep, but they don't despair. Just look at the historical examples in the Bible regarding responses to danger. When King Saul faced the Philistine invasion, he was completely panic-stricken.
Right, he fell apart.
His heart was not fixed on God, so his fear drove him to seek out a witch for help in sheer desperation. He lacked the anchor, so the storm broke him. But look at David facing Goliath, or King Jehoshaphat facing the Ammonite horde when he prayed, "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you."
Such a powerful prayer.
Or look at Stephen in the New Testament standing before the hostile council, facing lethal threats, yet his face was like that of an angel. They were fearless not because they were superheroes immune to human adrenaline, but because their confidence was in the Creator, not the creature.
Yeah.
And this inward stability, this freedom from the frantic need for self-preservation, is what actually allows for the radical generosity we see in the very next verse. When you are not terrified of losing everything, you are free to give.
It completely unties your hands.
Verse 9 says, He hath dispersed, he hath given to the poor, his righteousness endureth forever, his horn shall be exalted with honor. Spurgeon points out the mechanism of generosity here. He says the believer is a reservoir.
A reservoir.
Yeah. A reservoir is designed to take in water from a source and then disperse it out to the fields that need it. Believers are great at dispersing, not just gathering. If someone only gathers and never disperses, they are not a reservoir. They are a stagnant pond.
That's a great metaphor.
When I see the word horn in this text, my mind immediately goes to a Viking drinking horn, or maybe a ram on a mountain. Is this about abundance, or is it a weapon?
It's actually a combination of several ideas, and Isaac Barrow provides a fantastic breakdown of its meaning in our sources.
Oh, good. What does he say?
He explains that the horn is primarily an emblem of strength, both offensive and defensive, much like it is for a beast in the wild. It signifies power to repel enemies.
Okay, that makes sense.
But it is also a symbol of plenty, because horns were used as vessels to hold liquids, hence the concept of a cornucopia, the horn of plenty.
Oh, right, the Thanksgiving imagery.
Exactly. Yeah. Furthermore, it is a symbol of sanctity and dignity, because the holy oil used to consecrate kings and priests was held in a horn. So when the text says the bountiful person's horn shall be exalted with honor, it signifies that God ensures they receive solid, true honor, abundant strength, and high dignity, both in this world and the next.
Wow, it really encapsulates all of that.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the entire psalm, we see a complete circuit of grace. In verse 1, we saw the inward state, the filial fear of God and the delight in his commandments. Now in verse 9, we see the outward manifestation of that inward state.
The fruit we talked about earlier.
Yes. Generosity is the tangible evidence of filial fear. A person who genuinely fears the Lord and delights in his law will naturally reflect God's own generous heart. As Spurgeon notes, to be strictly just is not enough. God is love, and we must act upon those same principles of grace which reign in the heart of God.
It's a higher standard.
The bountiful soul proves their fitness to be a steward of the Lord by the right way they use their substance. Their character is not spasmodic. They are not generous by fits and starts depending on their mood, but their life is the result of settled, sure, and fixed convictions. Their liberality has salted their righteousness, proving its reality to the watching world.
Liberality has salted their righteousness. That is a fantastic image. It preserves it, proves it is real. The deep peace, the steadfast heart, and the open-handed generosity of the believer create a beautiful portrait.
It really does.
A person who manages their money well, lends to those in need, doesn't panic when the news is bad, and reflects the character of God. But the psalm does not end there. It ends with a stark, jarring contrast.
The total shift in tone.
Yeah, it shows us the exact opposite of everything we have just discussed.
Yeah.
The text says, "The wicked shall see it and be grieved. He shall gnash with his teeth and melt away. The desire of the wicked shall perish."
Heavy words.
The wicked see the blessing, the peace, and the generosity of the righteous, and their reaction is not repentance or even curiosity. It is grief and rage. We see a quote in the sources from a poem by William Cowper that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, the Cowper poem.
Yes, Cowper writes about how the unwelcome voice of heavenly love grates on the thankless ear, crippling his pleasures with the cramp of fear. Truth intrudes on the wicked man, and his will and judgment are at continual strife. I also noticed the historical and cultural note from Joseph Roberts about the Ramayana giant, describing a furious man gnashing his 32 teeth.
Visceral imagery.
It is a visceral, physical manifestation of spiritual defeat. It is almost animalistic. Why does goodness provoke such a violent, internal torment in the wicked?
The psychology of this reaction is unsettling, but really necessary to understand. William Bereavement and Joseph Carroll dissect this brilliantly in the notes.
How do they explain it?
The wicked are not just angry in a general sense. They are specifically tormented by the sight of goodness. Why? Because the righteous man's peace is a walking indictment of the wicked man's chaotic, self-centered life. It is an existential threat.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Bereavement points out that it is the property of the devil to hate virtue, precisely because it was good. The wicked, as his emissaries, resemble him in this. They grieve to have the foulness of their own vices made conspicuous by being placed near the light of a virtuous example.
The light exposes the dirt.
Yes, envy is quite literally a self-consuming fire. Carroll explains the phrase melt away. The gnashing of teeth is caused by the vexing of the heart. The wicked man melts away from his own internal heat and chasing.
He destroys himself.
His own wrath slays him. He melts like a snail, leaving a slimy trail behind, as Spurgeon vividly describes. The wicked man desired to accomplish his purpose through wickedness, but that very wickedness is his defeat. He wanted to be a great one, the founder of a lasting legacy, but his desire shall perish.
It all comes to nothing.
And this brings us to our theological conclusion of the text. There is an absolute unbridgeable chasm between the two destinies presented in this psalm. We see Ebal and Gerizim, the blessing and the curse, set opposite each other.
Right.
The righteous endures forever, their memory is always green, their hearts are fixed, and they are generous, all by the sustaining power of God's grace. The ungodly, relying on their own cunning and consumed by their own malice, rot from the inside out. Their envy offers no comfort, their grief has no cure, and their ultimate fate is dissolution. The contrast is total, and it highlights the supreme blessedness of the man who fears the Lord.
It is a sobering way to end the psalm, but it magnifies the beauty of the grace given to the believer. To briefly recap our progression today, we started with a God-given filial fear and delight in the commandments, which requires a supernatural heart transplant.
Amen.
We moved to the practical outworking of that faith, showing that sanctified common sense leads to discreet and generous living. We saw how this fixed trust in the Creator provides an unshakable peace amidst the evil tidings of a chaotic world. And finally, we saw how that very peace and goodness drive the unrepentant, wicked mad with self-consuming envy. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on what we have
It's a
discussed.
challenging thought.
We spend so much time refining our theology on paper, making sure our doctrinal statements are perfectly aligned. But based on this text, what if the greatest undeniable proof of your theology is not your vocabulary, but your financial spreadsheet and your resting heart rate when you get bad news?
That'll preach.
Think about that. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We hope the knowledge gained today equips you to read the Psalms with fresh eyes. Until next time.